Hello and welcome to today's CDCT Live. I'm Jason Rader, your host, and today's session will be on Sentinel, what to do next. With me today, we've got some fabulous folks to help me go through this conversation. We've got Ishan Mehta, Joshua Kay, both consultants with me here at CDCT in the security practice, and we have Victor Aranda, Principal Security Architect. Welcome, gentlemen. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So, definitely the title is what next, but let's talk about the what first. So for the uninitiated folks that are listening, who wants to take a shot and tell us what Sentinel is? What are we talking about here? Okay, I'm going to pick Victor.
What are we talking about? Sentinel. We're talking about the cloud native SIEM that is part of Azure and Microsoft's cloud platform. It has a variety of features and functionalities built into it that we'll be discussing today, and especially beyond just the elementary, logging and aggregation function, going into day two operations and what you should be thinking about right after you've really done the first initial setup.
Oh, I like that. For security, event and information management SIEM products, Azure. Sentinel, a cloud-based SIEM, pretty exciting stuff. We had a lot of folks adopted it, came out, in the last couple of years. A lot of folks adopted, and I think regardless of whether it's a cloud-based SIEM, whether it's Sentinel or whether it's anything, there's some things that need to go on once you've got all of the data sources pointed to it. And again, that's what we're talking about. We talk a lot about SOAR, and I was asked by folks to kind of define, and I just did what SIEM is. Somebody tell me what SOAR is so we can make sure everybody's in the same place as well. How about you, Ishan?
Yeah, so SOAR is kind of the functionality of Sentinel that I think differentiates it from its competitors like Splunk, et cetera, where it's the security orchestration automation response feature of Sentinel. Basically, it allows security teams to automatically respond to threats as they come in. So you can automatically write code or playbooks within Sentinel to automatically respond to threats as they come in. This allows like a SOC team to reduce their alert fatigue. It allows you to focus on things that you actually need to focus on because the simpler stuff is already taken care of.
Cool. Thank you, sir. And we'll get back to that in the end. I just wanted to kind of start off with some of those definitions. So, and gentlemen, thanks for being here. We've got, different skill levels of folks that listen in. We've got the business level folks. We've got the tech folks. We try to push all the buttons in all the areas. So if I kind of divert you back to something to get it defined, just bear with me. Thanks. So let's talk about the day two aspects of this. First of all, give me some, and I know we've done this a lot of times for folks, is in general, Josh, is Sentinel easy to kind of deploy?
Day one stuff, I would say, is pretty textbook. It's getting more mature. It's getting more data connectors, ways to plug into different data sources. Though that's, I would say, getting better. The day two things, the kind of customized data connectors, the things that are not necessarily out of the book, those can range in difficulty in various ways. It's all over the spectrum. So you have, I've got a couple of clients right now where, I'm working on getting some spam filtering going on from Mimecast, and, you'll have to get like a secondary ingestion point that's going to pull the logs and then push them off to Sentinel through Ceph or syslog, and those are not fully baked out. We're running into issues with the vendor with Mimecast, the person that actually developed the plugin that's supposed to work. The API credentials simply just they're not working on their side. So day two things like that can range all over the place. And then once you have these kind of data sources that are not out of the box, you have to be able to query that data and kind of put it in a usable format so that your SOC teams can understand the data that's coming in. So the cool thing about Sentinel, though, is it kind of takes in the data pretty much however you want it. It could be JSON, it could be Ceph, syslog, however you want it formatted. It does the parsing more on the query side. So when you create these KQL statements, you can save them as functions, and those functions start acting as kind of mock tables in the database. It's not actually creating tables in Sentinel. So So these, so when you're creating these functions, these KQL queries, and parsing it out, that's kind of more day 2 things. And then you want to start to then be able to perform actions on these customized data connectors, and then take it further with the SOAR capabilities of automation rules and playbooks.
Nice. And I'm sure we're going to get more into that stuff. What have you guys seen during these deployments? Because of course, the day 1 stuff affects the day 2 stuff for sure. And I wanted to kind of, before we get even further down the day 2 road, what are some of the implementation kind of lessons learned? I don't want to say mistakes, but things that we've learned along the way, or folks have learned maybe some of these things the hard way, maybe along storage requirements or retention or.
Yeah. So similar to most other SIM products, you're going to be using syslog and stuff as an ingestion point. And I don't know if you heard, but Microsoft actually just recently released their own Linux distro, but I'm sure we'll be seeing more of that come in the future. Currently right now, you can use any Linux distro of your choosing, and you can install basically this Ceph and syslog forwarder to forward all the stuff over to all the logs over to Sentinel to be ingested. Some of the day 2 things, or day 222, is making sure your log forwarders are functioning. So with the ingestion of syslog through the syslogd service that forwards to the OMS agent, those things tend to fill up the var log directory. And if you're not watching basically the basic health of your log forwarder, those log forwarders potentially can break down, and you're going to stop ingesting logs. So you need to make sure that you have adequate space there. That's why whenever we do our own deployment, we have Linux distros that have this separate partition for the var log mount point that's separate from the OS. That way, if it fills up, it doesn't crash the system, doesn't impact the OS as much. And it's a little bit easier just running a df-h on there to see kind of the health and the overall capacity of those mount points.
Ishan worked on some retention concerns too for another client that's probably worth double clicking on. Ishan, you want to touch on that real quick?
Yeah. So I guess one of the main things that I've learned from this whole process is kind of guiding the customer to look at the ingestion rates after a month or 2. A month or later, you don't exactly know how many logs you're going to be ingesting on day 1, but you do after a month or 2. You have a good average amount of logs that you think should be ingested. And so guiding the customer to look back a month or 2 after we set up Sentinel to look at how many logs and how much data they're ingesting is helpful, because they can select a data ingestion rate that is a better cost output than initially like a pay-as-you-go feature. So let's say you have like 100 gigabytes of data being ingested into Sentinel. There's a feature in Sentinel to store 100 gigabytes of data within Sentinel. That's a better feature for your money than doing a pay-as-you-go. And so that's kind of what we've learned as we go around this process, which is what kind of things can a customer look at a month or 2 after we set up Sentinel initially. And that's one of the bigger ones, because that's a lot of money that a customer can save. You just have to guide them in the right direction.
Yeah, so turning on everything and logging everything isn't necessarily the best approach, obviously. And trying to find which event types and sources and policies and so on are creating the most fruitful inference and alerts and so on, automation points in your SIM, right? What about long-term storage for compliance?
Yeah, so we have clients that want like 7 years for HIPAA, or 1 year for a different government regulants compliance. And so it's a challenge to kind of figure out what retention scheme works best for a customer and what will be helpful for them to like reach their HIPAA compliance or a NIST or whatever. And so Microsoft offers something called blob storage, which is kind of cheap storage that you can retain logs in for, up to 7-8 years. And so we see clients asking for that, where they want logs within Sentinel or within Microsoft in general, so their Azure platform, for 7 years. So we create logic apps that basically move their logs when they're ingested into Sentinel to blob storage, and they're retained there for 7 years. And so there's a lot of functionality within Azure to meet those different compliance regulations, and that's just one of them.
And that still gives them access to the logs in the event that they need to use them in an investigation or something that's historical.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So let's say a customer has some sort of ransomware attack or something like that. They can go back and look in their log data and kind of make sure that everything is going as properly as intended in the past.
Okay. So one of the things we hear a lot about, regardless of the SIM platform, is false positives and dealing with that. You know, you get a whole bunch of data sources into a new platform, and then you've got to tune that thing out. I need to hear some war stories. Somebody tell me some stuff about that.
So there's a cool newish feature in Sentinel called Watchlist. So something that could generate a lot of false positives, or if you have admins that are routinely doing work within Azure, and you have some out of box rules that are saying, you know, you want to report on any kind of administrative functions that may be applying some user behavior analytics to it that come with Sentinel, and you may get a bunch of false positives with admins triggering these alerts, and with those alerts comes alert fatigue. So with Watchlist, you can actually bake into these analytic rules a query that will examine a watch list, and a watch list is just a key identifier pair, or you can put in a CSV of just different attributes. And so you can create a table basically within this watch list of the administrative users, bake it into your KQL query to say if these admins are logging in to basically not alert on these activities. So that's one way to kind of detune like the noise and get better signal out of Sentinel.
I like that. Anything else?
Yeah, I mean, so you're going to have your obvious threat intelligence services. So you can complement your threat intelligence with these watch lists. If you have known kind of malicious third parties that are kind of attacking you, you can supplement them with these watch lists, or even there's a separate threat intelligence portion that you can upload threat intelligence specific CSVs and data into to further refine your data.
Got you. And I wasn't talking about watch lists, anything else. I wasn't trying to prod you for more on that. I was just saying, any other kind of tuning stuff that we need to talk about?
There's tons of tuning things. So, you know, generally, so another out of the box thing that basically has to be detuned is the cool thing about Sentinel, obviously, is you're plugged into the Microsoft ecosystem. So on the security side, we oftentimes will tell people to use Microsoft Defender for Identity for their on-prem Active Directory stuff. And when you plug in the MDI into Sentinel, it usually is just going to forward all of the alerts that are coming out of MDI into Sentinel. So you can actually go into the plugin, into the connector. You'll probably want to detune it because all the informational stuff is basically informational. You're not going to want to get alerted and all of that. So you're going to detune those connectors so that, you know, you're only going to get the severity levels you care about. You're also going to want to examine the severities of the existing analytic rules. Sometimes if you know that you're susceptible to certain things, or you know, you don't agree with the severity level that the analytic rules come out of the box for, you can escalate or de-escalate them, or even just remove them altogether.
Yeah, and piggybacking on that, I think one thing that people kind of gloss over when they set up Sentinel is a lot of the out-of-the-box analytic rules run on a certain frequency out of the box. And a lot of people just keep it at that certain frequency, like once a day or once every 15 minutes. And it's important to note that when you have like a high severity alert, you want the analytic rule running every 15 minutes is what we use, like 15 minutes or 30 minutes. But if you have like a low severity alert that you're looking at, or an informational one that isn't that much of a business impact, that's okay to run once every day. And so if you keep those out of the box analytic rules running at the frequencies they're set at, you're going to have a lot of alert fatigue. You're going to have low severity alerts coming in every 15 minutes. Whereas a SOC analyst could just look at it once every day. And so it's important to kind of tune those analytic rules to work at the frequency that makes sense for you and your business, and not just what comes out of the box as well.
I love that. And I think, that's probably one of the things that I experience the most when folks deal with new kit that comes into their organization, is they typically spin everything up. I want to see all the alerts, get them all in. And then there's an overwhelming amount of noise that comes into their, how they're operationalizing this across their team to deal with all of those alerts. And it can be a beatdown for that team until they figure out, the frequency that we're going to run those things, and the severity, and really how they respond to those types of events themselves. And I think, and the reason I bring this up, I'm restating what you guys have already said, is a lot of folks don't plan for that from a team perspective. And that learning, it's not really a learning curve, but it's an adjustment period that takes place, kind of like when you move into a new house or something. You got to figure out how you do things the way that works the best for the environment that you're currently in.
Yeah, we've got, you can look at it as 3 different segments of customers, 2 or 3 depending. But the first would be customers that literally don't have a SIM or security operations tool set like that, or if they have one, it was installed and it's just been sitting there collecting dust. And then, the other side of the table is folks that actually do have a SIM tool. They have security operations desk that's actually trying to use it or using it. And both of them end up having speaking of day 2 operations, the sort of like, what are we doing in this tool that we didn't do before, right? Where's the parity, and where are the new features? Where are the new day-to-day, task, care and feeding, things like that come up. And so frequently one of the one of the things we'll do during the implementation is look almost like, side by side between the 2 tools, whether it's, I'm just going to throw a bunch of names out there for you, but whether it's one or the other, and compare at least the visual output, the dashboards, the alerts, the log sources, and so on, to make sure that you're getting at least parity. You're not leaving any data source behind, and that you're getting what, the actual team on the ground that's dealing with this stuff has tools that they need, training that they need.
No, that's a good point. Yeah, a lot of folks approach a new tool like this of, it's got to be a like for like. Everything I had in my old tool, I want to move that over, and then there's that whole kind of thing that happens there. But I think, to Sean's earlier point, the SOAR capabilities of Sentinel are pretty good. I want to hear more about those, or integrations with other Microsoft tools. That's another compelling thing that we think about with Sentinel.
Yeah.
Somebody give me some good feedback. Thanks, Josh.
So similar, to kind of piggyback off of the data retention stuff, that's kind of like an easy low-hanging fruit that we generally implement in terms of the automation part is, moving that data to more longer-term, cheaper storage is not an automatic thing. There are some tools within Azure to help supplement this, but, Sentinel resides in the log analytics workspace, and with log analytics, you get these automation playbooks that you can implement. So generally, we just go grab, set up a playbook for moving that data to more longer term storage, and then apply a lifecycle policy on top of the storage account, so that it adheres to either the 365 or the 7-year data retention. On top of that, there's you have automation rules, and those are a little bit different than the playbooks, in that you can define those within Sentinel, and you can have them trigger off of the alerts. So if the alerts, say they'll trigger a bad login or a bad password login to Azure, you can trigger an automation rule to either go and notify your SOC analysts via email or Teams or whatever. If you need something a little more intricate, then you have playbooks that you're going to implement, these logic apps that you can take that failed login alert, and maybe you want to block that user. Yeah, you want to create a ServiceNow incident because that's how you've operationalized your SOC team. So you go and you put it into your ticketing system. You can do things like if there's any kind of change of blocking devices on your network, you can maybe even modify the CMDB in ServiceNow. So there's really there's a lot of automation rules, and well, not automation rules, but playbooks that you can actually go to and grab. There's so Microsoft owns GitHub. They've leveraged GitHub to the nth degree for Sentinel. So there's plenty of tools there. There's hundreds of playbooks to implement and kind of act as a starting point for implementing your own customized playbooks. And then there's also a bunch of tools there. I've used some tools to, we've got a customer that's got like 20 different installs. And this is kind of one of the drawbacks of Sentinel, is that you have to, if you're monitoring different Azure tenants, you're going to have to create like different Sentinel installs and log analytic workspaces in each of those tenants. So day two things also count as like lighthousing all of those to a centralized tenant, and being able to tune your analytic rules and then grab the kind of the source of truth analytic rules and then deploying them across the board to your other tenants, so that you have like a consistent baseline and thresholds and as Yushan mentioned, running frequency and everything. And you can automate those things either PowerShell or through the PowerShell within Azure. So there's quite a good amount of extensibility in terms of leveraging automation within Sentinel.
And you just made me think of something that I think a lot of people don't necessarily equate. When we talk about Sentinel being a cloud-based SIEM, a lot of people think that it's only for cloud resources. I mean, you can monitor anything in Sentinel, right, Ishan?
Yeah, kind of what Josh talked about. On your on-premises devices, you can have all sorts of devices. You can have Cylance firewalls. You can have Sonic Wall. You can have all sorts of devices that everyone uses. And they may not be available within Sentinel as a direct data connector. And so what Microsoft has cleverly done is allow you to send generic formatting logs called comment event format, or obviously your syslog formatted logs to Sentinel. And you can start running queries on top of that. And so that's when I talk to customers and they're kind of concerned. They're like, we have this like really esoteric device that you may not have heard of. I'm like, that's fine. You can still ingest those logs and you can still run analytic rules on that. And then also, piggybacking on what Josh said about the SOAR capabilities of Sentinel, we also have clients that want playbooks and automation rules for those esoteric devices. So for example, it's not an esoteric device, but like Palo Alto firewalls. Let's say a SOC team wants email alerts every time there's a command and control attack on their firewalls. You can automate that within Sentinel to send an email to any email that you select, and it'll send it as soon as there's an analytic rule that's triggered. And so there's also vendor-specific automation within Sentinel, which is really helpful because that's what really clients care about, which is like, I have this device. How do I automate some of the responses to that? And so we can ingest it and we can run analytic rules, and then we can also automate responses to them as well.
Thank you. And Josh did talk about that. I wanted to make sure we kind of equated it to the folks outside that, like me, who didn't associate that with the external devices. I think
I was going to mention the cost considerations for data sources in Sentinel. I know probably there's a horse that's already been beaten to death in other contexts, but the inverse is interesting. It's like, no, it's not a cloud SIEM that only works for cloud resources or cloud sources of data. Also takes on premises and other SaaS applications and so on. But for data coming from Azure, I mean, literally can't get easier than it's already in the same log analytics workspace, which is, that's a significant difference between having to have an agent, deployed amongst all your server VMs and so on, just to grab log output, right? Yeah. Or a separate third-party agent rather.
Yeah, that was Sentinel in and of itself is exciting in the way that it operates and can pull from even multiple other cloud sources into for those analytics. But I also think, when coupled with other capabilities from Azure and the Microsoft stack in general, it makes investigations now an easier aspect. Anybody want to make some comments related to that? And I also see, Microsoft's maturity on this. I think Sentinel was a big step forward for them to get everything in the right place, but now it's about operationalizing that and actually doing the investigations and the hunting.
Yeah. So, typically my demos with clients, we kind of go over that, which is Sentinel. And I think clients really like this from my conversations with Microsoft employees, which is within Sentinel, you can sort of cross-correlate alerts and incidents and kind of draw a map of the different incidents associated with a specific entity. So let's say one person, what I'll show clients typically in a demo is a random attacker has gained access to our environment. They've elevated their privileges. They've done a mass download of our data, and then they've deleted their account. And so those are 4 separate alerts that we get within any SOAR or a SIM. But within Sentinel, you can actually see a graph of one entity, and it shows like 4 different lines to those different alerts that person has generated. And so that's really helpful for anyone who's doing investigation within Sentinel. They can also look at a timeline of like what happened in which order as well. So you have a chronological order as well. You can investigate more into the entity, so you can get where they're located, their email, if that's available. A lot of times, if that information is not available, that just means that they're not inside your organization. Because if any like information about someone's available, it's likely that they're in your organization. And so there's all sorts of threat hunting capabilities within Sentinel. And I think the main one is that map that you can correlate incidents for a specific entity.
Yeah, like I had mentioned earlier, getting inundated with a bunch of information, it basically becomes, my joke is a haystack of needles, right? You get so many things, but how you can visualize those and put them together is an important aspect of getting to the what you really care about. You don't want all of this data. You want the specific things that are posing risks to your organization.
That reminds me of my favorite part of Sentinel. Which is the bring your own machine learning component, which is in preview right now, but there's a GitHub up there that's being updated that has some sample training notebooks and so on. And so the idea is that you have this, what is essentially a gigantic data lake, right? And the ability to spin up Databricks and run your training and analytics through basically a Spark environment, pulling all of that data from Sentinel, from log analytics, and then training anything you can imagine off of that data. You don't have to be a PhD to be doing this. A lot of the community based training and models that you can start from are a pretty good approximation that just need to be customized for your environment. But I see that being kind of the open-ended next step, that will constantly be developing, is that people are going to be training their own models, publishing them, things for remote access, anomalous access, anomalous behavior at the endpoint of the network. You can imagine being able to cross-correlate all the different tools that you now have feeding into your SIM. Well, the other SIMs have something similar to this, but the idea that you can have a very data science kind of native experience where you basically have a Jupyter notebook and a bunch of Python data science libraries, and you're pulling data directly from the environment where the notebook is running. I mean, that is pretty interesting to me. So speaking of like direct day to here, now that you have this thing, start taking advantage of it. Here's a cool thing you can do. Anyone who's even considering Sentinel or is using Sentinel should be looking at the BYOML. Bring your own machine learning and taking advantage of that, at least playing around with it and learning that this is almost certainly going to be the future, I think, of SIM content and for lack of a better term, borrowing your analogy, the needle in the haystack content where, how are you going to find that? Well, fortunately, we have needle detectors that you can train that can differentiate between the needles and the hay pretty well, actually, if you get your parameters right.
No, I love that. And that was literally my next question was what's kind of next for this space? And I think you killed it right there. And I think it's a shame to not go to that level because I think it's the big setup is where we've been, and to not take it to that level and then be able to leverage the ML, certainly bring your own, but to leverage the ML of a community and then to take it beyond that is where we're going to have to be to deal with all of the signal that we're getting and to make sense of that and operationalize it. Yeah,
GitHub is kind of the driver of the democratization of security know-how and shops, where what used to be a packaged feature or intellectual property in a SIM product that you purchased and have entitlement to is now becoming more of a community driven. I mean, I don't think it's ever going to disappear from the private or the proprietary aspect, but the idea that you can 5-10 years from now there's going to be a huge body of existing here's what we did, here's the model that we trained to detect this, here's some novel new data format that comes in from a new SaaS security tool or API gateway that we didn't have before that you can now retrain previous models on, right? Very interesting stuff there.
Very cool.
Yeah, I'm kind of piggybacking on that really quick. The machine learning is absolutely like a next step that I think anyone using Sentinel should kind of investigate in. I think another thing that people are kind of overlooking is the workbooks within Sentinel, which is basically a data visualization structure within Sentinel where you can kind of create graphs and bar charts and line graphs and all kinds of visualization on the data you're ingesting within Sentinel. And where we see clients really caring about this is they want to justify the budget to their CEO or CFO or CIO, and they want that easily printable out, what is in Sentinel, what it costs me, what's the benefit, those things in like a visualization form, which I'm sure any CEO can appreciate. And so I think the next step for Sentinel is it's going to be a community of people, like Victor said, who are developing their own workbooks that can visualize data on a variety of different things that you ingest within Sentinel, whether it be Palo Alto logs. You want a line graph of how many Palo logs you're ingesting and how many alerts they're creating, or something like that. So that's where I see this eventually becoming in its full maturity, is tons of visualization around data in Sentinel.
Yeah, anyone who's worked with Matplotlib or Plotly, ggplot, any of the data science visualization tools that you may be familiar with, you can pull and plot with all the same switches and features that you'd have in any other notebook, right? So for the visualization folks and geeks, that's pretty interesting, especially if it's a live dashboard that's constantly updating. I'm going to wait for Jason to start saying something right before he says something. I'll jump back in. Go ahead.
No, I'm excited about this conversation as well, because I think that regardless of all the great back-end stuff, if you don't have that visualization, and I'm in the habit of creating an executive visualization and then an operational visualization, because the execs want to see what they're getting, and you customize that. And that's what sells stuff, whether we like it or not. It's the pretty dashboards and those kinds of things and the real-time dashboards that we can get. I mean, to be able to show a level of risk back to the leadership of an organization that we're dealing with or mitigating is very, very powerful. So I think as that continues to grow and mature, to Ishan's point, it's going to get even more compelling of a thing you can't live without. And that's where I was going to wrap, guys. Any final thoughts or, day 3 advice for the guys as we kind of leave this discussion?
We could segue off into the the sunset by talking about so managed services and the reality of the situation on the ground being that most customers don't have neither the team nor the resources to build the team, and even if they did, those people don't exist. There aren't enough of them slash us slash, you know what I mean, to fill the world of organizations, each with their own SIM and SOC tool, right, and competency around it. So what you end up, you know, driving towards is consolidation of expertise and managed services where you collate, you know how and so on, and let the customer come to you and say, look, yeah, you guys do this, please. So well, we can leave it with that, and maybe as the topic for another day is how do you manage a fleet of environments and scale that up, and also what's it like for a customer that's going through a managed services transition, whether they were previously under their own flight or whether this is all new and it's greenfield for them altogether.
No, I agree. We'll definitely mark that down, producers, for another day. We'll definitely have to talk about that. Josh, Ishan, any parting words?
No, I think Victor said it well. I do feel like the entry bar for it's easy to kind of get Sentinel going in your environment, especially plug into other Microsoft related products in the Microsoft ecosystem. But being able to cross correlate that data and being able to search through it, especially with the machine learning notebooks that Victor was talking about and the workbooks that Ishan was talking about with the visualization, the skill level quickly ramps up, and while it's got a low technical bar for entry, you can pretty much introduce whatever technical aptitude you want to it.
Yeah, and kind of final words. I think I've talked to Josh quite a bit about Sentinel, and from my conversations with him and my own opinion is I think we're both optimistic about what Sentinel can provide and where it's going. Like obviously there's its drawbacks as we've discussed, but like we also discussed, there's tons of room for improvement for any really smart person out there that wants to explore it and develop their own IP around it. You can really make an impact within the security field by looking at Sentinel. And so I think, I leave every engagement like more optimistic about what it can offer and what's next.
I love that. I like to end on those kinds of things. And I agree. I think the barrier for entry is significantly low from the aspect of acquiring this tech, operationalizing it and utilizing it to its fullest extent. We're still working up that curve. And again, I think to Victor's point, there's a certain point where the managed services aspect is definitely going to be the route that a lot of folks are going to need to take for a variety of reasons, which we'll discuss on another episode. We love you guys out there for all the comments that you give us. We appreciate that, and we appreciate your recommendations for other sessions. If you would like to learn more about what we do here at Insight CDCT, please visit us at insightcdct.com. Thanks for joining us and have a great day. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah.